title today is Feeding Our Soul. And Ernest Holmes talked about how empires can rise and fall, and we have chance in our life and change in our life and vicissitudes of fortune, and we have the drama of our human everyday events. And he said, but we need to let go of them to give way to something bigger, because he said, you are greater than anything that ever happened to you in your life. So when I read, I usually like to give credit to the people I read, but I read a blog this week by somebody whose name I have absolutely no idea how to pronounce. I don't even know if it's a man or a woman, but I thought it was so relevant. And this person said, you know, we have a higher purpose in life than to work, eat, sleep, and die. And that we all can't be rich and famous, but if we're doing what it feels like our heart is telling us to do, then we're all heroes and heroines. And she said, finding the work of your soul is how you take control of your life. And she said, do you ever get the feeling that you're meant to live bigger, that you're meant to create, that there is more to life than whatever it is that you're doing? And she said, that's what having a purpose means. That's your life is saying to you, you have a purpose. And she said, you know, so often we let doubt and fear hold us back. We judge ourselves. You're not good enough. What makes you think you could do that? Who do you think you are? And we can't listen to those voices. Instead, what we need to ask ourselves is, why am I getting this feeling that I can do more, that I can be more? What does it mean for my life? And what would I do if I followed my heart? What am I really meant to do? And then to me, the biggest question, and I want to share something from my life on this, is to ask yourself, suppose the dream I have isn't impossible. What's the first thing I would do? And then do it. Suppose the dream I have isn't impossible. What is the first thing I would do? And then do it. So I want to share, I shared this with the book group and of course in Miracles, some of it. But I wrote an article, do a lot of writing for Science of Mind magazine, and they asked me to do an article on forgiveness for the October issue. And I did this article, and when I got done, it's a really, really personal sharing. In fact, those of you that are in the book group, I'm going to share it in tomorrow afternoon's book group, where we're doing a book on forgiveness. And after I got it done, the voices in my head started to say, are you really going to let 100,000 people read this? Really? This is so personal. Do you really want to do this? And I even woke up a couple of times in the middle of the night. And then I thought to myself, what am I going to do? What can I do to stop myself from being upset? And I thought there were two things I could do. I could write the article, or I could call up the editor of Science of Mind magazine and say I can't do it. And as soon as I thought that, I knew that wasn't going to happen. So I did. I sat down. I told Becca, I said, it's the only thing I could do. I need to take that first step. And I sat down and I re-edited the article. I just made it shorter. And I had so much going on in my head. Take this out, take that out, don't share this. And I left it all in. And I just hit send. And I sent it to her. And 10 minutes later, I got an email back, thank you. And the other one, I've shared on this here before about the class in marketing that I'm taking for speakers. Well, I finished most of the class, and I have 6 talks booked. And the first one is June 11th. And so last week, I started getting this same stuff, like, are you out of your mind? I mean, this is what was going on in my head. Why the hell did you do this? Why did you do this? Why are you doing this? Do you really think that with all the great speakers out there, you're good enough to make money as a speaker? And all of this stuff started going through. Now, of course, I already paid for the class, and I've got 6 talks books, so I'm doing them. But again, I really do. I ask myself that question. Okay, what is the first step that I can do that's going to make this better? And I decided the first step I could do was to start writing one of the talks. Pretty simple, huh? And so I started to think in my head, all right, I want to use a lot of stories. And just to show you how the universe works with you, once I decided that I was going to sit down and start preparing, stories started to fly into my head. And any of you that know our home, we have 5 full bookcases. So just because an idea for a story comes into my head, where to find it doesn't come with it. But it did this time. Every single time I thought this might work, I was led to go to the right book. And the one time I wasn't, I went in and I said to Becky, I got this story, remember? She said, yeah. She said, I don't know what book it's in. And I said, me either. I walked out of the room, sat down on my computer, and just like that, I walked back into the room and picked out the book. And so I'm just saying, you know, if you've got something that you've always wanted to do it. Really do it. And ask yourself, what's the first step I could take it? Even if it's a small step, take it. You know, live your life intentionally and be willing to heed whatever that call is. You know, we call Eckhart Tolle in our book group E.T. And E.T. says that a lot of people believe that they're dependent on what's happening to be happy. He said they're dependent on form. And what they don't get is that what happens on the outside is always changing. It's not stable. So when you're dependent on your happiness on form, your happiness always has to change because the outside is always changing. And he said what happens is we miss the perfection of life itself, a perfection that's always there and that's beyond anything that's happening on the outside. And so he says what we need to do is accept the present moment and find the perfection that's deeper in what's ever going on outside. And so the reason I share that is, you know, it's really easy if you've got this calling in you, pushing you to do something, to say, well, you know, that the world doesn't do that. And the outside, you know, appearances are different. And what Tolle is saying, what I'm trying to say is move beyond that. Just know if it's in your heart, you're meant to do it. So I want to read you a quote from a priest named Father John O'Donoghue. And he wrote, "Once the soul awakens, the search begins, and you can never go back. From then on, you're inflamed with a special longing that will never, ever again let you linger in the lowlands of complacency and partial fulfillment. The eternal makes you urgent." And I love that phrase about lingering in the lowlands of complacency and partial fulfillment. He's saying, you know, if it's in here, once you open up to it, you got to go all the way. So I had a story that I wanted to share. And the more I thought about the story, I thought it would be really fun to act it out. And so today is the first installment of the Space Coast Players, starring Becky Fox. So you have to come up. Don't applaud yet. So here's the story. And actually, this is something I read, but imagine you're in Puerto Rico, the Caribbean, you're on a beach, and you're watching this couple. And this couple is walking along the beach, looking around. Obviously, it's a really romantic time for them. They're really in love. And then, well, it's not going to happen. Here we go. Then, something happens. His cell phone rings. And in the midst of all of this romance and all of this wonder, he answers the cell phone. He drops her hand and he walks away. And she goes back to her chair. He then spends 15 minutes on the phone and then walks back to his beloved.
I can't believe you answered it. Look how beautiful it is here, and you're not even here.
Listen, if it wasn't for my job, we wouldn't even be on this vacation.
Vacation? You call this a vacation? This is supposed to be our anniversary. You brought your job with you. You're addicted. You know, you used to be married to me. Now you're married to your job.
That's our little vignette. Now I will probably pay for this later, but this is really the truth. We had to rehearse this 4 times yesterday before she felt comfortable yelling at me. And yet in real life, she feels comfortable yelling at me all the time. I kept saying, yell more, and she kept going, no. Look, so the reason I wanted to share it is, you know, when we think about living from our soul, what makes really for a happy and successful life? Your job or enjoying the present moment with somebody that you care about? Are we feeding our ego or are we feeding our soul? And it's exactly what Eckhart Tolle said. Happiness is loving what is as it is. So I want to read you a quote from Rabbi Harold Kushner. He said, when your life is filled with the desire to see the holiness in everyday life, something magical happens. Ordinary life becomes extraordinary, and the very process of life begins to nourish your very soul. And so he's talking about seeing holiness in all the things around us that we might take for granted, like a paved road or a washing machine, or even our problems. I know it's hard to think of a washing machine as holy. I saw that face. And he said even your problems, which might help you grow. And he gave an example of a mother who had a daughter who had 3 kidney transplants because each one failed. Each time she had a kidney transplant, her body rejected it. And so now she's on dialysis. And he said, but it's not a story of despair. He said, this mom is so in awe of her daughter, her ability to cope with the situation, her ability to still remain cheerful and full of life, that this mother found holiness in her daughter's situation. You know, and obviously that's a pretty big situation in our life, but it got me to thinking, if we can't find holiness in the small moments of our life, we're going to miss a lot of holiness, because there's a lot more small moments than there are peak moments. So you need to search for that holiness everywhere. So I've been talking a lot lately about Barbara DeAngelis in her book, Soul Shift. And I want to talk about it again today. She talks in the book about a concept she refers to as divine discontent. And she said, what that is it's something within us. There's an urge that wants to be born into our life, but it bumps into the walls and obstacles that are within. And she said, and so if that's happening to you, don't worry, because you're not alone. We're all going through it. And she tells this cute little vignette about 2 young fish that are swimming along, and an older fish starts swimming in the opposite direction. And when they come together, the older fish says to the young fish, "Hi guys, how's the water?" And they each keep on swimming in their own direction. And after a little bit, one of the young fish turns to the other and says, "What the heck is water?" And what the heck is water? And Barbara says that the journey of self-discovery begins when we aren't sure where we aren't sure who we are, and we aren't sure why our life is turning out the way it is. And she said, what we need to do is wake up and see what we haven't been seeing. And then she tells this really great story about all of us. I'm sure everybody here has flown. So she was flying from San Francisco to her home in Santa Barbara, California, and she had the window seat. And she looks in front of her, and there's a young man sitting in the seat in front of her, and he's got the shade pulled almost all the way down. He's got it up about 4 inches, and he's looking out the window like this. He's totally got his body contorted. And she becomes fascinated with why he's doing it. And so she has all of these thoughts. I don't remember all of them, but I remember one of them was she started to think, well, maybe he works for the circus, and he's a contortionist, and he's practicing. And then she starts willing him to move the shade up, and it doesn't happen. And then she thinks to herself, maybe he's foreign, and he's never seen a shade like this, and he doesn't know how to pull it up. But she finds out that's not the truth, because the flight attendant goes over to him and says, would you like your shade up? And he says, no, I'm fine just the way I am. And so for the entire flight, he spent it like this, looking out this much window when he could have pulled it all up. And after the flight, Barbara thought to herself, why was I so fascinated with this that I spent my whole flight watching him watch out? And what she said, the reason for it is that she realized that so many of us live our lives like that we lower the shade, as she put it, of our perceptions. We look through a small sliver of our consciousness and then wonder why we feel all alone and confused. We forget that we can pull the shade up anytime we want. So I want to close. I want to close with something I did a couple of years ago, and it just struck me that it really fits in this kind of a message, because it really speaks to how on some level we're more, that we're so much more than the flesh and bones, and that we might not on this plane ever get to understand it all. And it's a story about a young boy named Tim and his family, and Tim is the one that's basically telling this story. And so for the last 10 years of Tim's dad's life, his father had Alzheimer's. And so 10 years now, this man has Alzheimer's. And Tim described him, and he meant it in a loving way, as kind of a vegetable. He couldn't speak. He needed to be dressed. He needed to be fed. So for years now, people have been feeding him, dressing him, and nobody has heard him speak. And Tim was 15 and his brother 17 when this occurs. Their mother would sometimes go out and the boys would watch their dad. And this one particular Sunday, the mother needed to go shopping, and so she asked the boys to take care of their dad. And they're watching a football game. And all of a sudden, their dad slumps over on the floor, gasping for breath and ashen. And the boys become really frightened. And Tim's older brother says, "Go call 911. And then, from out of nowhere, a voice they didn't even remember says, "Don't call 911, son. Tell your mother I love her. Tell her I'm all right." And he dies. Now move years forward. Tim's a doctor, and he's telling this story to a group of doctors. And he's telling them that because his dad died at home, the state law was they had to do an autopsy. And they did the autopsy, and what they found was his brain was almost totally destroyed by the Alzheimer's. And Tim said, "So for many, many years, I've been asking myself, who spoke? Who spoke? And he said, I've never found a medical textbook that helped me get close to the answer, and I'm no closer today to knowing the answer than I was then. He said, but carrying the question reminds me of something I never want to forget. Much of life can never be explained, but only witnessed. Think about that. So thank you for being here. God bless you, and I hope you have a great week.